Rupert Lowe, please.
Right. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I want to start by just reading what the NAO, in, as usual, their excellent report said. No comparable nuclear power station has been completed.
Sorry, can you tell us the reference where for the record?
It's in the summary here.
Oh, in the summary. Yeah. Okay, so you give us the paragraph in the report.
I haven't actually got it here, Geoffrey.
Okay.
So, no comparable nuclear power station has been completed without substantial delays or cost overruns, and uncertainties remain around construction performance, future electricity demand, and the competitiveness of alternative technologies. Now, this project, as we know, is basically not going to be complete and not be producing electricity till the late 2030s. And it's going to produce electricity for about 6 million homes. As you quite rightly say, it's going to go through several parliaments. So the people responsible for delivering it today are very probably will have ridden off into the sunset. So I start with that concern. I then basically look at the principle of the whole thing. I actually think this is 60s technology. We've done some work on nuclear here, which I would like you to take a copy of away with you. I think this is 60s technology. I think the Rolls-Royce modular is far more effective, as Tris says. The French are not building this technology anymore. And there's also other alternatives. There's something called Apollo Atomics. I don't know if you've heard of that in America. And you talk about avoiding risk. That's what London's done, and it's self-immolated. It's just, you can't avoid risk. You have to be prepared to look at some risk in anything you do in life. And I think, I'm pro-nuclear, but I'm not pro-government being involved in the financing of nuclear projects. And I think in this case, and I want to get to the point here, which is how you're going to ensure you don't go over 47.7 billion, I actually think you've got the worst of all worlds. So you've got a minority shareholding in a board which is, and let's face it, the private sector is always more fleet of foot than the public sector. They're smarter, they're quicker, they're actually motivated to make money. The public sector doesn't share any of those things. And when I look at the financing arrangements, I see that ultimately, I'm sorry, you all talk about this stuff, but in the end, it's the taxpayer. And I look, to give you a quote here, Geoffrey, on page 43, government support package. Right, so I look at the support package. So I'm with Tris. I don't think you will deliver this within 47.7 billion. So you're then going to be looking at this clause here, which has got all sorts of contingency reasons why you're going to be financing it. And it'll be the taxpayer. And ultimately what you're doing here, you're giving the private sector, in my view, a very good return if it does, by some amazing miracle, come in at or under budget. If it doesn't come in at budget, they're still getting an acceptable return. And they're not actually taking all the risk. The taxpayer's still taking the risk. They've already taken some risk through their bills. It's been mutualised across their bills. So I'd like to know why you think this is the right technology and why you are so confident, given what the NAO says, that you're going to deliver this within the 47.7 billion, which is the upper limit of what you're talking about.
So let me kick off.
And tell me I'm wrong. I don't think I'm wrong when I read the document.
So let me kick off with just the technology choice, and then we'll come on to the financing package separately. But particularly having been around when we were talking about the development of Hinkley, a major benefit of building a nuclear power station are the replication effects. They are the ability to take not just the designs, but the teams, the skills, the know-how, and the supply chain, and replicate them. Now, those are substantial, and the report brings those out in terms of the benefits that it
Still outdated technology there.
And so, one of the main reasons why we decided on Sizewell and this design was because we were able to take advantage of those. Now, we're not precluding any decisions we might make in the future. And as I say, we are enthusiasts for SMRs and other models, but we are trying to plan a programme here that manages risk across the sector. Second thing I would say is I don't think we are saying that we are getting rid of all risk. That is, you're right, that is impossible. Our job for any major programme is to set up the structure that best manages those risks and make sure all of us play our part across the governance structures to make sure this programme is delivered as close to time and budget as it can. Now, in terms of the financing structure and the regulatory structure, there are two things. If we'd gone for a CFD and we'd gone for purely private financing, as we had before, we think this wouldn't deliver either the best value for customers or indeed be affordable for customers. And
you think? Have you done a lot of modelling on that?
So there's a huge amount of modelling on that shows the different rates of return that you need to apply and the costs that would result. So I'm sure we're happy to share the initial analysis.
They've probably done a lot of modelling on HS2 and that didn't work too well, did it? But there we go.
Well, quite. And we've learned lessons from HS2. So the point is we are not replicating HS2. We are not putting in a fixed price because of the cost that's involved. We have created a regulatory system that balances those risks. You may or may not know my background. My background's in Ofgem, where we have this regulatory model, and that is what we apply across all networks for the same principle. This is the best and most efficient way to manage risks for the public. Now, what we've also done is set up a governance structure that allows the combination of government and the private sector to deliver. Caroline's mentioned the reason why we have majority private sector on the board, and those for all the reasons that you described. We're not saying this should be a pure public project, but without a doubt, at any point in time, there is a major public interest in how this is delivered. And that's why we set up the structure that we have. And finally, and Nigel can expand on this, the reason why we think this is a success, it's in a very different place to any previous nuclear project because of the maturity of design and the work that he and his team have done to get us ready. So I'm genuinely not sitting here saying there is no risk. That would be unreasonable for anybody. But anyone who is embarking on a major programme like this, I think we've put a structure in place that best allows us to manage those risks. But Nigel, if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, the technology is, basically it's a pressurised water reactor. It's a big one, but it's a pressurised water reactor. 67%, I think, of the world's reactors are pressurised water reactors. The Rolls-Royce SMRs are pressurised water reactors. So the technology is very, very similar, to be honest. So when you look about, the global picture, I think your challenge was none of these things have ever been delivered on time. Well, if you look globally, where there's been a fleet, they are. So if you look now, the Chinese generally put one of their gigawatt plants on within 5 years of putting the foundations in. If you look at the Baraka experience, where they built 4, the Koreans built 4 there. They started off, the first one took a long time, the fourth one took much quicker and much cheaper. So, the whole global picture tells you build a fleet of whatever you're going to build, and you'll get the best results. I think, I personally think that the technology is very similar to anything else. It's just on a larger scale. I think the piece where we need to learn, and you can only do this really if you've got a mature design, is the modularisation piece, I think, that you mentioned. That is the key to really, I would say, construction and timelines that are consistent, because then you're in a factory, you've got a consistent output. But you can only do that if you've got a stable design. So very hard to imagine in any world where you do the first one, you've got that stable design, it works, you've gone through a commissioning program, etc. As I say, what will make us a success is our ability to take that Hinkley design, turn it into factory modules, turn it into big precast, turn it into building things on the ground and lifting them in, which is a kind of step up again from what they've done at Unit 2 at Hinkley. So, I don't disagree that there's a very poor picture globally about first-of-a-kind units. I think there's a very good picture of a fleet effect, and that's what we're trying to replicate. We're on the start of that journey, and we start off very confident we can do it.
And Nigel, you were involved, I think, in Hinkley Point C. Am I right that a lot of the cost overrun came from a lot of half-witted civil servants with not enough to do, turning up on site and demanding meetings and basically cocking their leg on things and getting in the way? Is that a fair comment? Have we got that under control for the new project, or is that, because that wastes a lot of time and money?
Well, I can't comment on that, but what I can comment on is the fact that we are well supported by the department to make sure we kind of focus people on actually delivering the job, and I think we'll continue to do that. And I think at Hinkley, I'd say the big lesson learned from me through Hinkley was that lack of maturity at the start of it around the cost estimate, lack of maturity in design, them 7,000 design changes none of us anticipated, and that had a huge impact on the project.
And Caroline, am I wrong about the ultimate guarantee being the taxpayer on this if there is a cost overrun? I know you all talk about confidence in not being a cost overrun. Am I right in what I read in this document? Is that right? And I'm also right, aren't I, that the Secretary of State, I think, has the opportunity to cancel the entire project if he so decides to do that too?
Under certain circumstances, yes.
Under circumstances, that's also in this document, isn't it?
So the main time would be...
Which I've written joke against, but having spent all that money, that would be a complete joke. But anyway.
Would be, but I think what we're talking about is the value of early warning. And if it looked like very early on there was a breach of the higher regulatory threshold being forecast, there is an option under the discontinuation agreement to do that. But as you say, it would be a last case.
So it could still be a case of thank you, taxpayer.
So yes, the taxpayer will need to intervene, but that means that other shareholders will be diluted and their returns will go down.
The return is still very good. I've looked at their return. Their return is still very, very adequate, even if that happens, Jonathan. Do you know what it is?
No.
Yes.
Shall I tell you what it is?
So can I say, I think that
It looks to me like they get 12 to 13% if costs are low, which is pretty decent return. And it looks, if any drops to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, to 10.8 to 11.4% if the costs overrun. So where's the penalty? I don't see it.
Let me explain to you. Unlike sort of PFIs, this is not a transfer of risk. There is no, one of the things we've established is that there is no balance sheet big enough to take this deal with that. I mean, that's the reason we moved away from the CFD. So it was always going to be the public sector ultimately looking at this. What we have tried to do is to, given that fact, ensure that we get the best commercial disciplines into the deal. And that's the rationale for bringing it in here.
But you mentioned earlier also that Hinkley C was financed at a time when interest rates are virtually zero. Well, let me tell you, that's not normal in history. Those interest rates were the ones that were the outlier. Where we are now is far more common in terms of long-term interest rates. That was because the government was printing vast sums of money and keeping interest rates down at zero. So let's not talk about things that aren't the norm. The norm is where we are now.
I think on that point we accept that. That's why we've said the comparison with Hinkley is not necessarily
But it was
straightforward.
it was used as an exemplar.
But
I think I just wanted to double check. I think that the figures that you gave are for the project at the HRT. If you go beyond the HRT, some of those other pressures and disciplines kick in. So they're not included, as I understand it, in those figures that you've got there.
I think it's also worth saying that those are the ultimate returns. A lot of these people are driven by yield, and what you see is in delay scenarios that distributions are getting locked up for very significant periods of time. Yes, those return numbers that you're quoting do result on are dependent on this thing getting into operation.
Yes, I think this is, you've got the worst of all worlds here. That's my opinion. I'm not sure we're going to change my mind. But our job as this committee is to try and protect the taxpayer. Poor taxpayer is a punch bag for any form of incompetence which the government actually has got a proven track record of during delivery of big projects like this. And I think part of the reason for the modular is the technology is better in my view, and we can have a debate about that. Please take away this paper. But also the fact that you've got much smaller delivery risk. That's the whole point. This is another vanity project, very long term, and the people who are making the decisions now will have ridden off by the time it is or isn't delivered. So I think that's me on that, Jeffrey. I don't think I can say any more, but I am concerned, and Caroline's confirmed that my concerns are justified, I think.
So back to what you